There is something quietly magnetic about the villains in anime. While stories often frame them as the enemy, as the obstacle to be overcome by the hero, there is a strange comfort, a strange familiarity in their pain, their ambition, and even in their downfall. The edges that define hero and villain blur in the quiet hours of the night, when we think more deeply and see more clearly. Maybe it's because the villains are allowed to break. They're allowed to be angry. They're allowed to question everything. They are not confined to the impossible standards of righteousness that so often burden the protagonist. And in their defiance, in their collapse, we find ourselves reflected. Think of Pain from Naruto, a boy named Nagato, whose dreams were stolen by war, whose love for peace was drowned in the screams of the innocent. He began his life as a gentle soul, a child blessed or cursed with the Rinnegan, wandering the ruins of a world that took everything from him. His tears fell as prayers to gods who never listened. In those tears, in that unanswered grief, he asked, "How do you create peace in a world that only knows pain?" And when the answer never came, he became the answer. He took the pain upon himself and turned it outward. If the world would not learn through kindness, then maybe it would understand through suffering. Maybe it would only listen if every heart felt what he had felt. It was not just vengeance. It was logic, warped by loneliness, by years of silence, by the bitter sting of betrayal. It was a heartbroken child shouting into the void, hoping the echo would sound like truth. Villains like Pain are relatable because they ask the same questions we do. Questions about fairness, about justice, about why good people suffer. But where heroes have faith in a better tomorrow, villains lose that faith. And perhaps, at times, we do too. That's why they linger with us. Not because we support their cruelty, but because we recognize the path that led them there. We recognize the fork in the road. We wonder what we might have become if our own story had bent a little differently. Then there's Zeke Yeager, the beast titan from Attack on Titan, a man who grew up under the crushing weight of ideology, who was raised to be a weapon by parents who saw him not as a child, but as a means to an end. His betrayal of them was not born out of cruelty, but a desperate grasp at survival and autonomy. He was told what to believe, how to act, who to hate. And when he finally had the power to choose, he chose to erase suffering from the world altogether by erasing its source, humanity. It is a monstrous conclusion, but one that came from a heart mangled by manipulation. Zeke didn't want to rule, or conquer, or dominate. He wanted to end a cycle he never asked to be born into. In his broken way, he wanted to be kind. Anime allows villains to express a part of humanity that heroes cannot afford to show. Villains can be wrong. They can be lost. They can change their minds, make selfish decisions, wallow in despair. They can scream about how unfair the world is without needing to immediately correct themselves. They can be ugly with grief, raw with bitterness. And because of this, they often feel more human than the protagonists tasked with always doing the right thing. They are free in their failure. Think of Meruem from Hunter x Hunter. Born as the king of the chimera ants, he was meant to be a tyrant, a devourer of life. And at first, he was. But something changed in him. A single girl, Komugi, who could do nothing but play a board game, challenged the very core of who he was. She didn't fight him. She didn't flee. She simply played. And through her, Meruem discovered something no other character could teach him: compassion, curiosity, the quiet, aching beauty of connection. The more he learned, the more he saw himself not as a ruler, but as a person. And when the time came for his end, he did not die in a blaze of conquest, but lying peacefully beside the only person who ever saw him as more than a monster. His arc was not one of defeat, but of redemption. It whispered that even those born in darkness can choose to reach for the light. In every villain, there is a sliver of humanity that mirrors the parts of us we try to hide. The doubt, the anger, the desperation to be heard, to be seen, to matter. Villains are often born not from evil, but from the absence of hope. They are created in the shadows left behind when no one answers the cries for help. Their plans, their actions, their cruelty, all of it often stems from a single, unfulfilled wish: to change the world so it cannot hurt them anymore. And perhaps that's why we listen to their stories as we fall asleep. Not because we agree with what they did, but because they help us understand what we feel. They speak in a language not of triumph, but of pain. And in the stillness of the night, when the world softens and our own thoughts become louder, those stories don't seem so far away. They echo through the corners of our mind, asking questions we've long been afraid to answer. What would you do if you lost everything? Who would you become if no one ever came to save you? And would you have the strength to stay good if the world gave you every reason not to? Maybe that's why we don't just fear them, we mourn them. Because in their tragedy, we see what it means to be human. The stories of anime villains do not begin with evil. They begin with tears, with absence, with a missing hand that was never there to guide them back from the edge. They begin in the cracks between joy and trauma, where the world fails to catch a falling heart. They are born from children who waited too long for someone to understand. Sometimes they are born from love itself, love twisted, denied, or lost too soon. Sosuke Aizen from Bleach is one such example. A man so composed, so impossibly calm, that he seemed invulnerable even to emotion itself. But beneath the layers of intellect and elegance, Aizen was a creature shaped by loneliness. In a world where power determined trust, he found himself surrounded by people who could not understand him, who could not reach the heights of thought and strength he possessed. He became isolated, not because he desired cruelty, but because no one truly saw him. And in that alienation, he sought to recreate the world, to dismantle a system built on blind faith and shallow order. His betrayal was not an explosion of rage, but a quiet, calculated undoing of everything that failed him. Aizen's villainy came not from anger, but from indifference born of too much distance. What makes him relatable is not the scale of his ambition, but the root of his motivation, the need to belong, the desire to be understood, and the slow corrosion of self that occurs when those things are never fulfilled. Many of us know what it's like to be underestimated, to feel invisible, to wish we could shatter the surface and be noticed for who we really are. Aizen took that wish and turned it into a revolution. And then there is Akaza from Demon Slayer, the upper rank 3 demon, whose fists are fueled by something deeper than bloodlust. He was once a boy named Hakuji, an orphan with nothing but desperation and aching hands. He stole, he fought, he lost everything. And then he was given a second chance, a place to belong, a master who trusted him, a daughter he could love. And for a brief, glimmering moment, he believed in goodness again. But fate, as it often does, had other plans. That fragile happiness was taken from him, swallowed by cruelty, and poisoned by despair. When he became a demon, it was not to destroy the world. It was to run from it. He sought power, so he would never be weak again, so no one could take anything from him. His violence is a mask for grief. Every punch he throws is the echo of a boy screaming for a life that was stolen. Akaza's pain is buried so deeply that even he has forgotten what it feels like to grieve. He only remembers rage. And yet, in battle, when faced with those who fight for love, for honor, for memory, something trembles in him. Some distant echo calls to him through the fog. That is what makes him human, even after all he has become. Not that he can still kill, but that somewhere inside, he still mourns. Villains like these are not just characters. They are questions. Questions we ask ourselves late at night, when no one is watching. If you lost your purpose, what would you cling to? If your kindness was punished again and again, would you still be kind? If the world told you that you were worthless, would you believe it? Or would you fight back? Not to protect, but simply to survive. And then there are villains who challenge our idea of what a villain even is. Light Yagami from Death Note begins his journey not with malice, but with a mission. He is brilliant, idealistic, burdened by the brokenness of the world. When he finds the Death Note, he does not become a murderer overnight. He becomes a judge. In his mind, he is cleansing the world of evil. He is becoming the hand of justice that no one else has the strength to be. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, that justice begins to rot. Not because he ceases to care, but because he begins to believe he is the only one who can fix everything. The power changes him, but it doesn't erase his core. It reveals it. Light is terrifying because we see the beginning of his descent and think, maybe I would have done the same. Maybe, if I had that power and I thought I could change the world, I too would take that first step. And that's the most dangerous kind of villain, the kind who could have been a hero, the kind who reminds us that the line between good and evil is thinner than we think, and easier to cross when we believe we are right. This is why anime villains stay with us. They are mirrors we hesitate to look into too long. They embody not only what we fear we could become, but what we already understand. They speak to our unspoken thoughts, our hidden wounds. They carry our questions, our doubts, our suppressed rage. And unlike heroes, they are allowed to fail in their search for meaning. They are allowed to be wrong and still be human. So as we drift into sleep, wrapped in quiet reflection, we remember their stories, not for the battles they fought or the chaos they caused, but for the honesty in their heartbreak. Because in the stillness of night, the stories that linger are not always the ones about triumph. Sometimes they are the stories about those who broke, who cried, who lost themselves, and who, if only for a moment, showed us that they were just like us. In the quiet spaces between action and aftermath, between a character's first breath and their final fall, anime reveals the soft underbelly of its villains. It reveals their memories, their motivations, their moments of hesitation, those split-second glances that say, I didn't want this either. And perhaps no character embodies this better than Itachi Uchiha. His story isn't about ambition or vengeance, but sacrifice. A sacrifice so vast and misunderstood that he was forced to wear the mask of a villain to protect those he loved the most. Itachi killed his entire clan, not out of hatred, but out of duty. He chose to become the villain in his little brother's eyes, so that Sasuke could grow strong enough to one day avenge them, never knowing the truth. He lived in shadow, died unloved, and asked for no redemption. His tragedy was quiet, patient, the slow suffocation of a man whose heart broke every day he was still breathing. And in that, he became one of the most human characters in all of anime. His strength was not in power, but in restraint, in his ability to endure being hated so that peace could be preserved, in his ability to be misunderstood and still remain steadfast in silence. Itachi's story resonates not because we can imagine doing what he did, but because we all know what it's like to carry pain quietly. To love someone so much that we would rather be hated by them than see them hurt. He reminds us that the worst choices are sometimes made with the most selfless intentions, and that the line between villain and hero can be drawn not by action, but by perception. Then there are villains who never meant to be villains at all. Characters like Shigaraki Tomura from My Hero Academia. His is the story of neglect, of a child raised not by kindness, but by chaos. Born into a home where emotions were punished and trauma was ignored, his quirk awakened in a moment of terror and confusion, destroying everything he knew. And instead of being comforted, he was abandoned. Instead of being helped, he was manipulated. All for one, the ultimate orchestrator, found him in the rubble and gave him purpose, but only by turning him into a weapon. Shigaraki doesn't seek domination in the way typical villains do. He doesn't want to rule. He wants to destroy. But his destruction is not born from evil. It's born from grief, from the loss of family, of innocence, of any chance at healing. He is what happens when a society fails a child at every turn, and that child grows up believing that the only way to be seen is to tear everything down. His rage is chaotic, yes, but at its core, it is a scream for help that was never answered. What makes him so haunting is that we can trace every step of his fall. We can see where things might have gone differently. We see the moments where one kind gesture could have saved him, and that knowledge makes his villainy feel less like a choice and more like an inevitability. It's a reminder that sometimes villains are not born, and they are not made. They are left behind. And then there is Madara Uchiha, the legendary shinobi, whose name echoes through the halls of war and memory. He began as a boy with dreams, a friend to Hashirama, sharing a vision of peace. But as his people died and his hope eroded, that dream curdled. Peace, he decided, could not exist in a world governed by flawed humans. Only through illusion, through control, could true harmony be achieved. The infinite. Tsukuyomi was not an act of cruelty in his mind. It was a gift, a perfect dream where no one suffered, no one lost, no one died. Madara's villainy is philosophical. He is not driven by petty revenge or ego, but by a grand, flawed idealism. He believes he is saving the world from itself. And that kind of villain is terrifying because he believes it so deeply. In many ways, he is like a dark mirror to those who pursue peace with pure hearts. He simply lost faith in others to help him build it. And how often do we, in our own lives, feel that same isolation, that same exhaustion with the chaos around us? His story is not just about power. It's about the loneliness of a man who tried to change the world and was met only with resistance. So he decided to rewrite it. Villains like these, the ones whose actions are twisted versions of noble desires, are perhaps the most relatable of all, because we, too, have wished for escape. We, too, have felt that the world is too broken to fix. And in those moments, we understand their logic. We may not condone it, but we feel the weight of it, like a stone in the chest. What makes anime unique is that it allows these villains to be explored fully. They are not defeated in the second act and forgotten. They are given space to speak, to evolve, to confront their own truths. They are not defined by a single moment, but by the entire journey. And that journey, however tragic, is what we carry with us long after the final episode fades. As we drift deeper into sleep, these stories begin to feel like our own. Their struggles become metaphors for our quietest fears. Their falls, their regrets, their longing for something better. It all settles around us like a blanket, not because we glorify what they've done, but because we understand the pain behind it. And in that understanding, we begin to heal a little too. In the soft folds of nighttime memory, another name surfaces: Zeref Dragneel, the immortal from fairy tale. A man whose tragedy lies not in his cruelty, but in his curse. Zeref did not set out to become a villain. In fact, he began with a desperate desire to revive the dead, to bring his little brother Natsu back to life. But in his pursuit of forbidden knowledge, he awakened something beyond comprehension. A curse that punished love and rewarded detachment. The more he cared, the more destruction he caused. His very emotions became weapons against the world. What could be more painful than being cursed to kill everything you love simply by loving it? Zeref's immortality became a prison, his knowledge a burden, and his loneliness unbearable. As centuries passed, he tried to isolate himself from humanity, hoping distance could protect others. But isolation can twist even the most well-meaning heart. In time, his hope turned to bitterness. He began to view the world as inherently flawed, as a cycle of suffering that only he had the power to end. And so, like many before him, he sought to destroy it, not out of hatred, but out of weary mercy. Zeref's story is not one of ambition or revenge. It is one of exhaustion. A man tired of living, tired of hurting others, tired of carrying a heart that still longed for warmth, even as it froze beneath layers of centuries-old pain. His villainy is born from a desire to be free, from pain, from time, from the consequences of caring. And in that desire, many find a mirror, because we've all felt the sting of unintended harm. We've all wanted to stop feeling when feeling became too heavy. Zeref is not a monster. He is a soul unraveling under the weight of eternity. In contrast, there is Askeladd from Vinland Saga, whose villainy wears the mask of manipulation, but whose heart is carved with contradictions. Askeladd is cunning, ruthless, and entirely self-serving on the surface. But underneath lies a deep loyalty to his mother, to his Welsh heritage, and to a dream that seems so distant it may as well be fantasy. He plays the villain because the world gives him no other role to play. Born of a slave woman and a Viking, Askeladd learns early that strength is survival and mercy is weakness. He sharpens his mind and his blade, weaving lies and war into a life of control. But even in his manipulations, there is method. Askeladd's greatest weapon is not his sword. It is his vision. He uses cruelty to shape destiny, knowing that he will be hated for it. He sacrifices his reputation, his body, and ultimately his life to plant a seed of change in someone else. Thorfinn. And isn't that what makes a villain compelling? When their downfall is not a result of selfishness, but of a greater purpose? Askeladd may have played the role of an antagonist, but he guided the story like a hidden hand, ensuring that his pain would give birth to something better. In this way, Askeladd becomes yet another reminder that villainy is often perspective. His actions, viewed through one lens, are unforgivable. Through another, they are acts of martyrdom. We relate to him not because we agree with what he does, but because we see the sacrifices he makes and how deeply he believes in them. He is a man caught between two worlds, trying to protect one while being swallowed by the other. And then we come to Griffith from Berserk, perhaps one of the most infamous villains in anime. A man who soared so high, only to fall so far. Griffith is charm incarnate, a vision of ambition wrapped in grace. He leads the band of the Hawk with brilliance and beauty, inspiring loyalty from all who follow him. But within that charm lies something colder, a dream so consuming that even friendship becomes expendable in its shadow. Griffith's tragedy lies in the illusion of nobility. He dreams of his own kingdom, a place where he reigns not just with power, but with purpose. Yet that dream is fragile, dependent on control, status, and the absence of failure. When that dream cracks, when he loses everything and is reduced to a broken man, he doesn't seek healing. He seeks rebirth. And in doing so, he sacrifices the very people who loved him most. In one horrifying act, Griffith becomes femto, ascending at the cost of countless lives. What makes Griffith so haunting is not just his betrayal. It's that we saw his humanity first. We saw him laugh, cry, lead, and care. We saw how much he meant to Guts and Casca. And when he falls, it feels like a part of us falls with him. That's the terrible magic of a well-written villain. They earn your love before they break your heart, and you're left staring at the wreckage, asking how something so beautiful could become so monstrous. Griffith's story warns us about unchecked ambition, about the danger of seeing others as stepping stones. And yet, he's not a caricature. He's a man who believed too deeply in a vision that asked too much of him. And that, in itself, is a deeply human flaw. Through characters like Zeref, Askeladd, and Griffith, anime continues to blur the line between villain and victim. Each one holds a mirror up to us, asking, "What would you have done in my place?" And while we like to believe we'd choose the righteous path, these stories remind us that life rarely offers such clarity. Sometimes, all we're given is a choice between two kinds of wrong, and we have to live with the consequences. As night deepens and dreams begin to stir, we cradle these characters in our thoughts, not because they were evil, but because they were honest, raw, broken in ways that echo inside us. And in that quiet, we find not fear, but understanding. In the ever-expanding universe of anime, another figure steps into the quiet spotlight of our thoughts. Makoto Shishio from Rurouni Kenshin. Burned alive by the very government he helped build, left for dead and betrayed, Shishio's rage isn't born in a vacuum. It is ignited by injustice. He rises from the ashes, literally and emotionally, a man convinced that only the strong deserve to survive. And while his ideology may seem cruel, it's born from a raw understanding of how fragile morality becomes when it's convenient for those in power to discard you. Shishio's body is wrapped in bandages, hiding the horror of his burned flesh. But it also serves as armor for the shattered ideals underneath. He trusted the Meiji government, believed in their cause, fought with deadly precision to ensure their victory. And for that, he was silenced. Not because he was wrong, but because he was dangerous. So he adopts the belief that the world belongs to those who can seize it. That weakness is a sin. That empathy is a weapon turned inward. But the truth is, beneath the ruthless exterior, Shishio is a reflection of a world that devours its own soldiers once they've served their purpose. His villainy isn't just a reaction. It's a commentary. It asks us, what happens when a system creates killers and then punishes them for being what it asked them to be? Shishio makes you think not about whether he's right, but about how close someone can stand to the line between hero and villain before being pushed across it by betrayal. And then, in the shadows of psychological depth, there's Gaku Yashiro from Erased. A quiet, composed schoolteacher with kind eyes and an approachable smile. Yashiro is the embodiment of the calm surface that hides a monstrous undertow. He is a serial killer who manipulates children, not for grand ambitions or tragic pasts, but from a twisted need for control and detachment. On the surface, there's no redemption here, no past trauma, no complex motives that soften the horror of his actions. So why include him in a meditation on relatable villains? Because even in his cold detachment, Yashiro reveals a truth. The most frightening villains are the ones who look just like everyone else. The ones who smile while hiding darkness inside. And in that, there's a chilling honesty. Not all villains are forged by pain. Some are shaped by apathy, by boredom, by a slow erosion of empathy that turns everyday people into nightmares. What makes Yashiro so haunting is how easily he wears the mask of normalcy. And that forces us to reflect. How well do we really know the people around us? How much of what we see is performance? He is not sympathetic, but he is unsettlingly real. A reminder that villainy doesn't always wear spiked armor or wield a tragic backstory. Sometimes it just hides in plain sight. But for every cold and calculating antagonist, there are those like Char Aznable from Mobile Suit Gundam. Known as the Red Comet, Char is both a warrior and a philosopher, driven by vengeance, idealism, and personal loss. His father, a prominent figure in the movement for space colonist independence, is assassinated when Char is just a boy. From that moment on, his life becomes a chessboard, every move shaped by revenge and revolution. Char is complex, not because of what he fights against, but because of how many masks he wears. He changes names, loyalties, and philosophies, yet underneath it all is a boy who watched the world betray his ideals and decided to reshape it, no matter the cost. His charisma is magnetic, his intellect sharp, but it's his contradiction that draws people in. He wants peace, but wages war. He mourns loss, yet causes it. He seeks justice, even as he becomes the very thing he once opposed. Through Char, we see how grief can warp into ideology, how a cause, no matter how noble, can be twisted by personal wounds. He is not a villain because he desires chaos. He is a villain because he thinks he can control the outcome of chaos, bend it to his will, and shape a new world through fire. That's what makes him relatable. Not his actions, but his intentions. Because deep down, we've all felt that urge to tear something down so it can be rebuilt right. Char just takes that impulse to its furthest, most catastrophic conclusion. These characters, so different in tone and purpose, all circle around a central truth. Villains are not born fully formed. They are made, piece by piece, by the world around them, by betrayal, by injustice, by silence, by loss. Some shatter under the weight of it. Others embrace it. But in all of them, we see not just the threat they pose, but the echoes of something deeply familiar. The reason anime villains leave such lasting impressions isn't because they are evil. It's because they are complete, fully human, even in their monstrosity. They carry dreams, regrets, longing, confusion, and in the quiet of the night, when we turn over their stories in our minds, we begin to see how easily any of us could fall into the same patterns, how circumstance can chisel away at morality until all that's left is survival. And maybe that's the real reason we can't stop thinking about them. They are not distant devils. They are reflections, echoes of who we might be, had life taken just a few different turns. And so, we drift further down the path of reflection, into the story of Tsukasa Shishio from Dr. Stone, a symbol of raw strength, youth, and conviction. Tsukasa emerges from petrification into a world wiped clean, where civilization has returned to stone and silence. In this new world, he becomes a warrior philosopher, convinced that the mistakes of the past must not be allowed to repeat. He draws a hard line between the innocence of youth and the corruption of adulthood, deciding that only the pure of heart should be allowed to exist in this reborn world. At first glance, Tsukasa's logic feels monstrous. He smashes petrified adults, ending lives that have yet to be reawakened. But beneath the brutality is a deep yearning for justice. He believes that power structures led to suffering, that greed ruined the earth, and that by reviving only the young, he can create a utopia untainted by exploitation. His vision is authoritarian, but it's not born from hatred. It's born from love for what he believes humanity could become. Tsukasa is compelling because he's not entirely wrong. The world was broken. Power was abused. The question he raises, whether the future is better served by destroying the past, is one that lingers long after the credits roll. He's not evil for the sake of it. He's trying to purify, to reset, to save. But in doing so, he crosses the line where good intentions bleed into tyranny. And isn't that a line we've seen in the real world too many times to count? His vision is utopia. His method is violence. And that conflict makes him human. His tragedy isn't his strength, it's his certainty. The inability to question his own righteousness. That's what makes his fall inevitable. But in the process, he challenges the viewer to ask the same questions he does. If you could rebuild the world, who would you bring back? Then, there is Nanami Kento from Jujutsu Kaisen. Though not a villain in the traditional sense, his presence introduces the idea that even those fighting for good can become disillusioned by it. Nanami is methodical, detached, clocking in and out, of exercising curses, like it's a soulless day job. And that's the point. He doesn't revel in combat. He doesn't find meaning in heroism. He is painfully aware that the world he serves is indifferent to sacrifice. While Nanami is a protagonist, his worldview is one of quiet resignation. He operates within a system he doesn't believe in because he can't bring himself to walk away from it completely. And that, too, is where villainy sometimes begins. Not in hatred, not in ambition, but in fatigue, in the slow erosion of idealism. Nanami serves as a mirror to those who do fall. He shows what it looks like when a man flirts with darkness, not out of desire, but out of emptiness. He reminds us that not all villains are born in fire. Some emerge from burnout, from watching the world grind down the good and reward the selfish. And maybe that's why villains are relatable, not because they fight the hero, but because they come from the same place, because they were the hero once, until they couldn't be anymore. We can't speak of emotional resonance without touching the story of Kyubi from Puella Magi Madoka Magica, a creature that looks adorable, a harmless even. But behind its blank expression is a mind entirely void of empathy. Kyubey does not lie, nor does it hate. It simply fulfills a purpose, harvesting energy from the emotional suffering of magical girls to delay the heat death of the universe. Cold logic, masked by innocence. Kyubey's villainy is unique because it doesn't come from human emotions. It is pure utilitarianism. It doesn't manipulate for pleasure. It doesn't kill for revenge. It simply optimizes suffering for a greater good. What makes Kyubey haunting isn't its actions, but its belief that its actions are normal. That pain is simply a byproduct. That sacrifice is just arithmetic. And what does that say about us? That in trying to relate to Kyubey, we're forced to confront our own contradictions. How often have we accepted pain because it serves a system? How often do we trade emotion for efficiency? In Kyubey, we don't see a monster. We see bureaucracy with a face. The kind of villain that doesn't feel like one until it's too late. Until you realize you've been complicit in your own tragedy. And now, we come to Ragyo Kiryuin, from Kill la Kill, a villain drenched in excess, opulence, and horror. Ragyo isn't just cruel. She's regal in her cruelty, reveling in power and domination. She embodies the extreme end of control, where others are not people but extensions of her will. Her fashion empire is a metaphor for manipulation, for how beauty and power can be used to suffocate instead of liberate. But Ragyo is also a mother, and in that lies her most painful contradiction. Because her villainy is not distant. It is intimate. It is inflicted on her own daughters, wrapped in the language of destiny and perfection. She believes she's elevating them, shaping them, freeing them from weakness, but she does it by stripping away their autonomy. Through her, anime explores the horror of familial villainy, of what it means to be hurt by someone who should love you, of how control masquerades as care. Ragyo's evil isn't just her actions. It's how confidently she commits them in the name of something bigger. She forces us to confront how love can be used as a weapon, how trauma wears couture, how the people meant to protect us can sometimes be the ones who break us. Each of these characters, whether brutal or bureaucratic, loud or silent, shares something essential. They are lenses through which we examine ourselves, not because we condone them, but because we recognize the paths that led them there, the tired paths, the broken ones, the paths paved with grief, purpose, or unbearable clarity. Villains stay with us because they echo back truths we often ignore. And in those echoes, something resonates, something lingers, in the quiet that lingers near the end, where the questions fade into soft echoes, and the night feels endless. We come to one final meditation, a lingering breath on the nature of villainy, and why it clings so tenderly to the soul. We have wandered through pain and loss, through ambition and betrayal, through wounds inflicted and endured. And now, as sleep begins to wrap around your thoughts like a warm cloak, we reflect on what truly makes these anime villains so unforgettable, so deeply human, and so gently haunting. Perhaps it's because, deep down, they are us, fractured, conflicted, trying and failing, searching for something that always seems just out of reach. It's easy to paint them with broad strokes, to see them as merely the enemy, the obstacle, the force that must be overcome. But stories don't work that way. Not the ones that stay with us. Not the ones that whisper long after the credits roll. These villains aren't simply monsters. They are people lost in the tangle of emotions and circumstances, responding the only way they know how. Dazai Osamu from Bungu Stray Dogs is not a villain, but the shadows he's touched are undeniable. Once a feared executive of the Port Mafia, Dazai's life has been steeped in darkness. And even as he tries to leave that past behind, to find redemption, there's always the pull of old habits, old pain. Dazai jokes often about death, but behind the smile is a bottomless pit of grief. His flirtation with self-destruction isn't for show. It's a symptom of a soul wearied by its own survival. And what's more relatable than that? The feeling of being tired, not because the day was long, but because being yourself for too long can sometimes feel like a burden. Then there's Legato Blue Summers from Trigun, a character drenched in devotion, cruelty, and philosophical despair. Legato serves knives with fanatical loyalty, but his actions stem not just from obedience, but from a belief that humanity deserves to suffer for its selfishness. He uses his psychic abilities to manipulate others, not for pleasure, but to drive home a message. That pain is the only universal language, and that mercy is weakness. Legato's ideology is horrifying, but it's built on real disillusionment, on a deep, aching resentment for the world's indifference to suffering. We may not share his methods, but many have known the feeling of being broken by the weight of what the world ignores. We move softly toward Medusa Gorgon, from Soul Eater, a villain whose intellect and cold manipulation mask a terrifying truth. She believes in evolution through chaos. Medusa is obsessed with disrupting the natural order, with breaking boundaries in the name of progress. She is a mother who sees her own child as an experiment, a means to an end. And yet, her calm cruelty isn't empty. It's calculated, deliberate, driven by a belief that stagnation is death. Her madness is orderly, her evil sterile. And what makes her frightening is not the spells she casts, but the rationale she offers. Because sometimes villains don't scream. They lecture, and their arguments make an uncomfortable kind of sense. That is what makes her relatable. The logic of ambition, the seduction of control, the desire to shake the world awake, even if it burns in the process. And then we find Shigaraki Tomura, the successor of All for One in My Hero Academia, a child shaped by neglect, trauma, and misunderstanding. He didn't begin as a villain. He began as a boy who was abandoned, whose cries went unanswered, whose rage was never soothed. His quirk, decay, mirrors his internal world. Everything he touches crumbles. And yet, under the layers of villainy, there is still a boy who wanted to be saved. The tragedy of Shigaraki isn't just what he's become. It's what he never got to be. He's not the product of evil alone, but of apathy, silence, and failure to act. We may not condone his actions, but many understand the pain of feeling invisible, of screaming into a void and hearing nothing back. Shigaraki stands not only as a villain, but as a monument to every child society forgot. And in all of this, maybe that's the thread. Maybe villains are relatable because they show us the consequences of unattended wounds, of loneliness left to fester, of dreams denied, and identities unacknowledged. Where heroes often represent ideals, villains reflect our realities. Raw, unfiltered, sometimes uncomfortable. They are the mirror we hesitate to look into, the voice we sometimes silence inside ourselves. When they ask why the world is the way it is, we listen, because a part of us has asked the same. Villains, in the end, remind us that morality is fragile, that goodness requires effort, that love is not a guarantee, and that sometimes people fall, not because they wanted to be evil, but because no one caught them when they stumbled. And as the lights of these stories dim, as the edges of memory soften into shadow, there's a kind of peace in understanding them, in forgiving them, even just a little, in recognizing that they were once children, once dreamers, once believers, just like us. So sleep now, with these stories settled like dust on old bookshelves. Let their voices fade into the distance, their sorrows echo gently in the quiet. And may you dream, not of villains and heroes, but of people, flawed, hurting, trying, always trying.